Welcome back, Seekers and Saints, to Fire in the Bones vlog, and today we are referring back to Pastor Shane's sermon of February 25th. So, let me start off with an interesting little story. One of my fondest memories, just in general in life, has to do with Parma Heights Baptist Church. I was senior year, and I was helping out with the Easter pageant. And for those of you that are newer to the church or were not around, or maybe you're watching this from outside Parma Heights Baptist Church, we had these big, great, grandiose Easter pageants. I mean, we had animals walking around, we had angels flying on the ceilings, not real angels, actors. I mean, it was incredible. Whole church involvement. And I was part of it. I was at first in stage crew, and then Pastor Paul, who was the director, let me take over the lights. I was really interested in the light board. And in senior year, we did 2 weekends of the Easter pageant, the weekend before Easter and then the weekend of. And the weekend before had gone great. The shows were perfect, as flawless as they could be, a lot of fun. And then came Good Friday. Now, Good Friday, in those days, my dad was working. He couldn't get out of work. And so I went to the Good Friday service because they required the lights. I was running the board that service. And they had tables set up for communion. And I believe it was Pastor Folger at the time. He said that every family should come up and partake of communion together. Nice idea. Just one problem. Myself and my friends who were in the youth group, none of our parents were there because they were all at work. We came because we had different jobs to do at the church. So we kind of just looked at each other and went, well, I guess we're a family, let's go. And we walked up and we partook of communion together. And I remember the youth pastor at the time, Dave Ambrose, came to us later and said, I was so proud of you guys. After that, we went to Wendy's, which was the first time I ever had Wendy's. Saturday, I don't remember. I just remember it being a good day because it was a good performance. And back those days, too, the whole church would team up to take down the Easter pageant, take down the scaffolding and everything, big affair. Easter Sunday, the weather was perfect. It was that storybook Thomas Kincaid spring day. I can remember 3 Easter sermons in my life, and that was one of them. Pastor Paul delivered a thought-provoking Easter sermon. And then I went to my mom's. I beat a Nintendo game that I had been trying to beat in a while. But bottom line, a lot of the fond memories are related to this church. So why do I bring that up? Because memory can be a good thing. You know, Pastor Shane is preaching from Philippians right now, and in Philippians 1, particularly verse 3, Paul talks about how the memory of the church at Philippi encouraged him. And really, at the end of the day, isn't that what memory should do? We take pictures not because we want to recreate the past. We take pictures so we can remember it fondly. Memory should serve to encourage us of what we've done as a church, and not just Parma Heights, but any church for that matter. But it should also be used as a means of saying we can keep going. Here's where we are, here's where we've been. You know, sometimes tradition can also do that. Sometimes tradition can keep a church moving and help in the outreach. But the biggest tradition of all, as we know, is things can, do, and must change. You know, tradition and memory have two things in common. The first one is they can encourage us where we've been and what we can do better to continue our work with the gospel. But the other thing they have in common is they belong in the past sometimes, or at least they live in the past. Now, I know that sounds harsh. Bear with me. Bear with me. This isn't a judgmental accusation statement. Because memory and tradition, some, not all, but a lot of traditions and memory come with 3 caveats. Number 1, when memory and tradition become the reason to do something, when we keep doing something because we have to preserve that photograph, we have to preserve this, we have to preserve that, well, that creates stagnation. Thomas Rayner is a former CEO of Southern Baptist Convention, and he wrote a book called Autopsy of a Deceased Church. It's a really great book. Check it out. I'll put a link in the description to a YouTube video he did about that book in a nutshell. And one of the things that kills a church is called the past is the hero. This is when a church gets so hung up on maintaining things, maintaining memory and tradition, that it loses sight of what's going on around them. I guess the best way to put it is they're so worried about where we were that we're not paying attention to where we are or where we need to go or be. Again, there's nothing wrong with having our memories. We should. But we should be looking at that like the cloud of witnesses that we read about in James or Hebrews. I suddenly forget. But that's how we should look at memory. The cloud of witnesses spurring us on. Not trying to jump into the picture of the cloud of witnesses. So we have to make sure that memory and tradition are not creating stagnation. Number 2, Jesus wasn't super tradition guy, by the way. Remember the account where the disciples are picking shafts of wheat to eat on the Sabbath and he gets called out because they're working? And what did Jesus say? Is not the body for food? I mean, what, we're not supposed to eat because of your tradition? Or in Mark 7, when he scolded the Pharisees for holding on to some traditional money god thing instead of taking care of the elders, he basically scolded the Pharisees all the time for holding on to tradition over gospel truth. Again, I'm not accusing anyone at this church of doing that. Personally, I don't see it. If it's happening, I don't see it. But we just have to bear that in mind, that Jesus wasn't the defender of tradition, he was the defender of truth. Amongst other things, the Redeemer of mankind, of course, and the Son of God, God himself. I've got a great article about this. I'll put a link in the description below. The final thing we need to keep in mind about memory and tradition is, well, the church has changed more than you think, hasn't it? Let's just look at Parma Heights Baptist. Are the same pastors here? I loved Dave Ambrose as the youth pastor. He's not coming back. He's at Heartland. He's not coming back. Are all my friends still here from youth group? No. In fact, to my knowledge, the only ones who are still here are AJ Schaffner and Dave Furry. They're it, I think. A lot of them have moved on somewhere else. Do we look at hymnals? When we used to, Jim Joustra, Pastor Jim Joustra was a brilliant, he was so talented. But are we doing what he used to do? Are we reading from hymnals and having organs for every worship? No, we have a projector and a guitar. There's nothing wrong with keeping some traditions. I love the Christmas candlelight one. That's a great outreach and it still has effect. So by all means, keep doing it. But I don't think anybody's going to miss the hymnals. Any new person, that is. If we suddenly got rid of the pews, is it really going to matter for the mission? It'll make the sanctuary look different, but will that matter? Maybe we can use it more. Thomas Rayner talks a lot about that, so I really suggest you listen to those podcasts. He does it a lot better than I do. But just think of all the ways we've changed and adapted. The live stream, this vlog, you think we were doing that years ago? Of course not. We've adapted to carry out the mission, and that's what we need to do. So here's the final conclusion. I realize that we've changed our name now. And that can be a little bit of a shock if you've grown up there. Heck, I got married at Parma Heights Baptist Church. But change is going to happen, especially if it furthers the gospel. Change is inevitable. And with all the changes the church has gone through over the years, did we suddenly forget who we are? Did the past dissolve? Did Jesus go away? Is the mission gone? It reminds me of the end of Indiana Jones 3, where Indiana's hanging from the edge of a cliff and he's reaching for the Holy Grail. And he's got one hand in his father's hand and he's reaching at the other for the Grail and he's slipping and he's saying, I can get it, I can get it. And his father, who spent his whole life looking for the Holy Grail, says to him calmly, Indiana, let it go. Because here's the real conclusion of the matter. The church is more important. The family is more important. And the mission is more important. We have to learn how to sometimes let it go. That's all we got for today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week on Fire in the Bones.